I think many women are carrying a form of physiological confusion that did not begin with them. And that matters because when someone struggles long enough, they eventually assume the struggle is personal, like a personal failure or a personal weakness or a personal inability to just do it right. But often, what people call failure is actually the predictable consequence of trying to live inside conditions that were fundamentally misaligned with female biology. And I do not believe most women are struggling because they are incapable. I think many women are struggling because they inherited cultural instructions that ask them to override themselves for decades, instructions that normalized disconnection from the body as maturity. And because these instructions were so widespread, they became invisible. They simply started sounding normal. But normal and healthy are not always the same thing, especially physiologically. For a very long time, women have been taught to relate to the body through management rather than understanding, control rather than communication, performance rather than coherence. And many of those ideas were handed to women with the language of empowerment, which made them even harder to question. Because if something is framed as progress, women often feel guilty for struggling underneath it. But the body does not respond to etiology. The body responds to conditions. And I think part of what we are seeing right now, the exhaustion, the hormonal instability, the burnout, the nervous system dysregulation, the metabolic dysfunction, the anxiety, the inflammatory issues, and the emotional depletion. It's not random. It's the physiological consequence of decades of cultural miseducation about what female bodies actually require. And I think we need to talk about that more honestly, not dramatically, but honestly, because many women were taught to build lives that their physiology could not sustainably support forever. And they blamed themselves instead of questioning the architecture. For decades, women were taught that smaller was healthier, less food, less body fat, less appetite, less need. The low fat era alone fundamentally altered the way many women learned to eat. Entire generations became afraid of real, deep, sustainable nourishment. Fat was treated like danger. Hunger became something to suppress. Women learned to celebrate restraint as a virtue, to feel proud of needing less. And this happened during a period when many women were simultaneously entering increasingly demanding professional, emotional, and domestic roles. So we created a culture where women were expected to do more while physiologically fueling themselves less, and then reacted surprised when bodies began showing signs of stress. But undernourishment does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks socially rewarded, high functioning, disciplined, productive, controlled, especially in women. Many women became extraordinarily skilled at overriding biological signals because that adaptation was culturally reinforced. Ignore hunger, ignore fatigue, ignore overwhelm, ignore cyclical variation, and ignore emotional exhaustion. Keep functioning, keep performing, keep producing, and eventually this became moralized. Women who could override themselves successfully were often viewed as more admirable, more disciplined, more ambitious, more worthy. But the body keeps responding beneath the performance, always. And this is one of the most important things I want women to understand. The body does not stop having needs simply because culture rewards you for ignoring them. Biology does not disappear because productivity is praised. And I think modern women are carrying an enormous amount of invisible physiological debt, not because they are weak, because they adapted. They adapted to speed, to overstimulation, to chronic output, to emotional labor, to nutritional confusion, to sleep disruption, to hyperproductivity, and to the expectation that they should function continuously regardless of internal state. And somewhere along the way, women absorbed the idea that cyclical physiology itself was inconvenient, that hormones were a problem to outsmart, that emotional variability was instability, that needing recovery was laziness, that slowing down represented failure. But female physiology is rhythmic by nature. It's not mechanical, and rhythms require a different relationship with energy, a different relationship with recovery, a different relationship with nourishment, and a different relationship with pace. Instead, many women were taught to relate to themselves as if they should operate with infinite consistency regardless of biological reality. the same energy every day, the same output every day, the same emotional state every day. And when they could not maintain that impossible standard, they assumed something was wrong with them. But variability is not pathology. Rhythm is not dysfunction, and sensitivity is not weakness. And I think many women have spent years pathologizing completely understandable physiological responses to overload, depletion, chronic stress, and biological inconsistency, especially because wellness culture often intensified the problem instead of resolving it. This is important to say carefully because many women entered wellness sincerely, trying to help themselves. But modern wellness culture often replaced one form of self control with another. Now the pressure became optimization, perfect routines, perfect supplementation, perfect hormone balance, and perfect nervous system regulation. Women became responsible not only for succeeding, but for biohacking themselves into endless functionality. And underneath much of it was still the same message. Your body is a problem to manage. Your body is an obstacle to optimize. Your body is failing unless it performs correctly. So even healing became performance. And performance is exhausting when your nervous system never experiences enough safety to stop monitoring itself. I think many women are profoundly tired, not only because of what they have lived, but because of how much self-surveillance they have been taught is normal. Tracking, monitoring, correcting, weighing themselves, fixing themselves, managing themselves, always watching themselves, rarely taught to understand what their signals within their body are actually trying to communicate. And again, none of this happened in isolation. Women were navigating all of this under broader cultural conditions that dramatically changed human physiology itself. Artificial light, constant digital stimulation, sedentary work, processed food environments, social comparison, economic pressure, relational fragmentation, and continuous accessibility. Human nervous systems were not designed for perpetual activation, especially not without sufficient recovery. And yet, many women learn to interpret their inability to thrive under these conditions as evidence of personal inadequacy. That interpretation is deeply important because interpretation shapes physiology too. Shame changes the nervous system. Self-criticism changes the nervous system. Constant internal pressure changes the nervous system. Many women are not just carrying stress. They are carrying the belief that they should have been able to withstand more than any human body was designed to withstand and do it gracefully. And I think that belief has caused enormous harm because once women believe the problem is character rather than conditions, they stop investigating the environment surrounding the symptom. They stop asking, how am I living? What pace am I sustaining? What signals have I been overriding? What does my body actually require? What adaptations has my physiology made in order to survive my life? Those are biological questions. They're not moral questions. And I think that distinction matters enormously, especially for women who have spent years turning physiology into identity. If they are tired, they feel lazy. If they are anxious, they feel broken. If they need rest, they feel weak. If they gain weight, they feel undisciplined. If they cannot sustain endless output, they feel inadequate. But many of these experiences make perfect sense inside the conditions modern women have been asked to normalize. Again, the body is contextual. And I think one of the great tragedies of modern health culture is that women were often taught to individualize problems that were systemic. They were taught to self-improve instead of question the conditions. Consume another protocol, try harder, become more disciplined, optimize more aggressively. Meanwhile, the deeper issue was often incoherence between biology and lifestyle itself. And this is where I think a different conversation becomes possible. Not a conversation rooted in blame, not anti-ambition, not anti-progress or anti-science, a more mature conversation, one that recognizes that female physiology is not defective for having needs. I think women deserve frameworks that help them understand the body instead of fear it, frameworks that explain adaptation rather than pathologize every response, frameworks that account for nourishment, rhythm, stress load, nervous system state, environmental intensity, emotional suppression, relational safety, recovery, and pace, because the body cannot be separated from the life surrounding it. And many women have been trying to heal while remaining inside the exact conditions that taught their physiology to survive in the first place. That is not failure. That is unfinished understanding. And I think once women begin seeing the larger picture, something important happens because now the question is no longer what's wrong with me. Now the question becomes what kind of environment has my body been adapting to all of these years? That question opens up a completely different future, one rooted not in self-war, but in biological literacy. And I think many women are going to discover that their bodies were never failing randomly. They were responding intelligently to conditions that no one properly taught them to evaluate, which means the answer is not more self-rejection or self-abandonment. It is learning how to create conditions that allow the body to function differently. That is the work, not perfectionism, not performance, not becoming less human, becoming more biologically honest. And I think that honesty is going to change many women's lives.